Now, if you go back to the first Kingsman movie, you'll recall that I did an in-depth analysis back when that came out, because that was a pretty wild conspiratorial plot. That film had everything in it, including the idea of a breakaway civilization run by Samuel L. Jackson. Hold on to your butts. And in that breakaway civilization, he was going to give this sort of privileged position to the elites who had paid to, be in his cave or whatever he had. And at the same time, all the people in the world were going to be depopulated. So a mass depop event via what could amount to 5G. And it was working in concert with the cell phones. And the cell phones had these chips that would basically trigger the brain waves and turn people into zombies and make them go crazy. And in that situation, it was the pseudo-British intelligence operation, the Kingsman, who, foiled this whole plot. There was all kinds of other weird elements that I put in my essay that I wrote back when that movie came out. And even predictive elements of events that later occurred a year or two after the film. Now, I didn't see the second one, but I did get a chance to go see the new one, because, again, this goes back to the origins of British intelligence in the 20th century. Obviously, British intelligence goes back further than the 20th century, but you have here Ray Fine being the founder of this super secret, super higher level spy organization that spies on spies. And he plays the character who's a pacifist, but who's secretly an assassin. So actually a pretty good cover if you think about it, a pacifist assassin. And it takes place during World War I, and I think most people know that World War I was kicked off by a fake flag event, namely the sinking of the Lusitania. And this provokes the events of World War I to come about, as well as the shooting of the Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip. All of this is in the film, by the way, and amazingly, they even hint at this being a conspiracy. However, what the film does is, as you can imagine, it twists it into, and it's kind of an inverted deflection conspiracy, to where it's not really the Black Hand and the Serbian nationalists working at the behest of who I think was probably British intelligence. No, it's a shady, unknown organization of the Shepherd. And the Shepherd is I think, enigmatic of pseudo-Christian ideas, right? Because he's the shepherd, and he's, at the end of the film, as you may know, defeated by goats. So the shepherd is defeated by his goats. And in biblical symbology, the goats, of course, are the wicked. They're those that have followed in the footsteps of the kingdom of Satan. And so the British intelligence is aided by the satanic, ultimately, is how the film ends up going. And they end up defeating this guy who's a Scottish lord, or a Scottish guy in hiding, very reminiscent of the Avengers, not the Marvel Avengers, but if you saw the Avengers with Ray Fine, Uma Thurman, and Sean Connery, once again, you have Ray Fine as a British intelligence asset, basically having to defeat a Scottish lord who, in that situation, in that movie, is engaging in weather manipulation and weather control. And so there's all these references to The Tempest and Shakespeare in that film, which I covered in my analysis of that as well. So you see these odd patterns, and we see odd patterns of characters playing similar roles, just like Samuel L. Jackson plays in both the first Kingsman, the figure who wants to utilize cellular technology to depopulate. You have in Cell, the Stephen King movie with John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson basically being in a similar type of movie where there's a sort of satanic force that is using cell technology to 5G, et cetera, to mind control people, to drive them nuts. So it's odd that this comes up in film all the time, and we can't talk about that. You're not supposed to talk about it. But so back to the new one. What's weird about this is that it portrays World War I as a necessary good to trick the U.S. basically into joining the war. So this British intelligence super secret operation tricks the U.S. into coming into World War I, and they do it through basically helping Woodrow Wilson out of being blackmailed and sexually entrapped by Mata Hari. The Mata Hari, of course, was a real thing. But the real story, of course, is that Colonel Edwin Mandell House, at the behest of the banking elite, is who maneuvered Woodrow Wilson to enter into World War I. And we know that that was all part of the same establishment that would engineer and bring the U.S. into World War II. It's the British banking elite. And the most amazing part of this weird inverted movie was the fact that both Gavrilo Princip and V.I. Lenin are basically at the behest of this international conspiracy. And what's weird is that we know that according to the letters of Warburg, which I've read in various archives, that he was actually funded by Lenin, Trotsky. These people were funded by Western banking elite. That's in their letters. Wall Street, other places funded these people. If you look at Anthony Sutton's books, right, Wall Street and the rise of Hitler, Wall Street and the Bolsheviks, both those books talk about how these revolutions are funded by these power elites to ultimately engineer World War I and World War I and II to exhaust the Anglo-American establishment's two main rivals, Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia. And so the two world wars and the Cold War basically did that to give the same power structure that's running the world today the upper hand, or most of the world. So that's the situation that we're in. That's how we got to where we are. That's Quigley's assessment of the 20th century, right, is that in Tragedy and Hope, that both of the world wars were engineered to bring about the new world order that we're entering into now. And I just thought it was fascinating to see this film, which is a really bizarre movie. It's kind of dark, not as lighthearted as the first one, and silly. I mean, it has all these silly elements. There's all these weird things with Rasputin being gay. I mean, it's just bizarre, right? I mean, I don't have any interest in Rasputin. I don't care about Rasputin. But it doesn't actually present the royal family of Russia, the Tsar, in a bad light, which was surprising because it actually makes the Bolsheviks part of this international secret conspiracy. The only difference is that, as you can imagine, as is always the case, the international conspiracy is the people that were running the British Empire. And the people who basically co-opted the Pax Americana into the Anglo-American establishment British Empire. So that's the real illuminate confirm. That's who's really running things. And this film hints at all that and then deflects it over into being some random Scottish dude and a collection of Russian villains. So Russia's always the bad guy, and then the British intelligence assets are the heroes. We see this in the Bond films as well, and it's always the reverse, right? These films are usually telling you more or less the truth about how it's a conspiracy going on out there in the world, but they're telling you that it's the wrong purveyors and villains.